Hi guys, and welcome to Last Light Radio Channel. Tonight we begin with a hard little truth that sits quietly beneath so many frontier legends. Starting over sounds noble when you say it fast, but what does it feel like when your money is nearly gone? Your boots are thin, and the road ahead is wider than your confidence. You can almost see it now. Wagon wheels grinding into dry earth, a pale sky stretching without mercy, a family carrying its future in boxes, sacks, and stubborn silence. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and while you're here, comment your location and your local time. Tonight, you are not meeting the frontier as a hero from a painted poster. You are meeting it as a tired, hopeful person with sore hands, nervous thoughts, and just enough faith to keep moving. The air smells of dust, leather, and old wood. The land waits without greeting. Now, dim the lights, and you begin with less than you hoped. By 1860, the dream of making a life from open land pulls at you with a strange force. Back east, or perhaps in a crowded river town, everything already seems spoken for. Good wages slip away into rent and food. A small farm costs more than your pocket will ever forgive. You hear stories in taverns, churchyards, and newspaper columns about space, freedom, and soil so rich it can turn effort into comfort. The stories travel faster than truth. They always do. So you gather what you can, a cast iron pot, a few blankets, a Bible, maybe, a sewing kit if someone in the family has the sense to protect it, an axe with a worn handle, a shovel that already looks too light for the job ahead, a skillet blackened by years of use, some seed, if you are lucky, salt pork, flour, dried beans, coffee. If luck stays with you a little longer, your possessions do not fill a fine wagon. They fill gaps, corners, and hopes. The first lesson arrives early. Poverty has weight. It weighs on the horses. It weighs on your shoulders when you lift a crate. It weighs on your choices when one object must be left behind for another. A chair might be useful, but nails matter more. A mirror would be nice, but you cannot eat nice. People who start with almost nothing become experts in harsh arithmetic. Which object keeps rain out? Which one keeps sickness away? Which one might be traded later for food, cloth, or help? You live inside those calculations. The road west, or simply farther out, is not one road at all. It is ruts, mud, river crossings, delays, and muttered arguments before breakfast. It is standing in a queue beside a ferry and wondering whether your last coin should be spent now or save for a worse emergency later. It is the cry of a hungry child, the smell of animal sweat, the slap of loose harness leather, and the endless powder of dust settling into your hair, your cuffs, your teeth. Even the bread tastes faintly of the road. You do not travel in a romantic glow. You travel in cramped discomfort. At night, if you camp in the open, the sounds shift. Daytime creaks and curses give way to wind through grass, a horse stamping in the dark, a kettle lid rattling softly as water warms. Smoke clings to your clothes. Your back aches against rough ground. You pull a blanket up and feel every pebble under your hip. Sleep comes in scraps. Somewhere nearby, someone coughs, somewhere farther off. A coyote makes a sound so thin and eerie that it seems stitched out of the darkness itself. It is not only the land that feels uncertain. Law can feel thin out here. Markets can vanish. Promises can stretch and snap. A man may swear he knows where the best land lies, and he may know no more than you do. Speculators hover around settlement zones like flies around summer fruit, selling confidence at a terrible price. Guides boast, officials delay. Maps are vague. Survey lines confuse everyone. Historians still argue whether many families truly understood the legal risks of claiming and improving land in these years, or whether hope simply shouted louder than caution. Hope usually wins. You meet all kinds on the way. A widow with 2 children and a face already set in practical lines. A young couple who still speak like this is an adventure and not a test. A Civil War rumour drifting from one campfire to the next, unsettling the air even in places that feel far from any capital. A preacher who carries more books than shirts. A blacksmith looking for a town that does not exist yet. an immigrant family whose English is uncertain, though their tired expressions need no translation at all. Everyone is trying to convert uncertainty into shelter. That is the true currency. You may imagine homesteaders as natural farmers, but many are not. Some know fields, some know workshops, docks, laundries, kitchens, or city alleys. Some were labourers who handled tools without ever owning them. Some knew crops in one climate and are now facing another. Some had read cheerful advice in pamphlets written by men who probably never had to pull water through frozen wind before sunrise. Expertise is uneven. Confidence is often borrowed. The land does not care. The strange thing is that starting from nothing can make you feel both lighter and more terrified. With little to lose, you can move. With little to lose, one mistake can ruin you. There is no soft cushion underneath failure. A broken wheel is not a nuisance. It is a serious event. A lame horse can redraw your future. A missing sack of flour can turn supper into worry and worry into real hunger. Tiny losses become enormous. This is why people guarded small things with such intensity. Needles, twine, buttons, grease, soap, spare cloth, a bit of lamp oil, a sound boot sole, a kettle without a crack. To modernize, these may seem ordinary. To you, they are the difference between inconvenience and misery. A missing needle means clothing goes unmended longer. Unmended clothing means exposure. Exposure means illness. On the frontier, every object carries a chain of consequences behind it. And yet, even in hardship, there are moments of surprising beauty that keep you from turning back. Dawn can come softly over the prairie, silver and pink, with dew bright on the grass and the breath of the horses rising in pale clouds. The world can look so open that your chest hurts. Meadowlarks call from fence posts or scrub. Somewhere, water catches sunlight and flashes like a coin. For one brief minute, you can almost believe the brochures, the stories, the promises, all of it. Then breakfast burns, or the wagon axle complains, or someone realizes a bag of meal has split and spilled half its contents. Reality is wonderfully persistent. A quirky little truth from frontier accounts is that people often carried surprisingly cherished objects into these brutal conditions. A fiddle, a teacup with a chip, a framed likeness wrapped in cloth, even a potted plant for the hopeful and slightly unhinged. It sounds absurd until you understand the point. A person starting from nothing still wants one thing that says life is more than labour. One thing that says beauty has not been entirely evicted. Even on the raw edge of settlement, the human heart remains inconveniently decorative. You feel that yourself. Maybe it is a ribbon tucked into a trunk. Maybe it is your mother's spoon. Maybe it is a book with a loose cover. When you touch it, your fingers remember a place where floors were even, and winter did not whistle through wall cracks. Memory has texture, smooth metal, soft paper, worn wood. It can sting more than cold. When you draw nearer to the land you hope to make your own, fear becomes more specific. Until now, the future has been a blur. Now it sharpens. Where will water come from? Is the soil shallow? Will there be timber nearby? Or only grass and sky? Who lives within a day's ride? Are they generous, suspicious, desperate, or simply absent? Can a garden survive here? Will fever visit in summer? Will snow trap you in winter? Can you pay filing fees, replace tools, feed livestock, and keep children clothed at the same time? The answer to most of these questions is unsatisfying. Maybe, maybe not. Pray hard, work harder. This uncertainty shaped the emotional life of homesteaders as much as the physical one. You do not simply arrive and begin thriving. You hover in a state between daring and dread. Some mornings, you feel almost bold. The air is clean, the horses are steady, your limbs feel ready for work. By evening, one bad scrape or one unexpected cost can make the whole enterprise seem foolish. Gentle sarcasm becomes its own frontier skill. Wonderful, you think. Another day of optimism with no floorboards. Still you continue, because stopping is expensive too. That's another fact often missed. Once a family had uprooted itself, turning back could be just as punishing as pushing onward. Pride played a part, yes, but money played the bigger one. Returning meant admitting loss, paying for the road twice, and facing the same scarcity you had fled. So many pressed on not because they felt brave, but because retreat had become impractical. Courage and lack of options can look very similar from a distance. As you near your chosen claim, the first contact with the land is rarely sentimental. You do not kneel and whisper thanks to the horizon. You inspect, you pace, you squint, you notice the slant of ground, the quality of grass, the traces of old camps, the path of runoff after rain. You check where wind seems to move strongest. You wonder how deep roots go. You scratch dirt between your fingers. It feels dry, maybe promising, maybe deceptive. The smell rising from it is warm and mineral, plain as bread and just as necessary. Some settlers believed certain signs predicted success. Thick grass meant rich soil. Ant hills meant drainage. A patch of wild plum or cottonwood hinted at water not too far below. Not all of these beliefs held true, but people used whatever knowledge they could assemble. Formal agricultural science was not reaching every wagon camp with neat instructions. So rumour, folk wisdom, memory, and observation all mixed together. Sometimes they helped, sometimes they misled. The prairie kept its opinions to itself, and there you stand, on a patch of earth that may become your life, with almost no money, incomplete knowledge, and a body already tired from the journey. The wind moves against your sleeves. Your hands smell faintly of rains, flour, and iron. The daylight begins to tilt. A child asks where home is. That question hangs in the air with more power than any official document. Home, at this moment, is not a house. It is a decision. That may be the deepest reality of starting from nothing in 1860. You're not stepping into security. You're stepping into exposure. The frontier strips away many illusions very quickly. It reveals how fragile comfort was all along. It reveals how much labour sits quietly beneath every ordinary thing. Bread, warmth, dryness, privacy, rest. None of them arrive by accident. None of them are cheap. Yet the same exposure reveals something else. You can survive a day that looked impossible in the morning. You can carry more than you thought. You can endure dust in your mouth, cold in your bones, uncertainty in your stomach, and still lay out the pot, strike the fire, and prepare for another dawn. This does not make you grand. It makes you persistent. On the frontier, persistence is often the more useful quality. So as evening settles over your first rough camp near the land, the sky deepens from gold to violet. Smoke drifts low. The animals quiet at last. Someone stirs a plain supper that smells of salt, grease, and relief. Your fingers are stiff. Your neck burns from sun. The blanket waiting for you is coarse, but welcome. Above you, the stars appear one by one, cold and ancient and entirely unimpressed by your plans. You look out into the dark and understand the bargain. Nothing is promised here. Everything must be made. Morning on the open land does not arrive with ceremony. It seeps in cold and grey, carrying the smell of damp grass, old ashes, and horse breath. You wake stiff under your blanket and stare at a sky that already seems too large for any private worry. A meadowlark sends out a bright, almost cheerful call, which feels faintly insulting under the circumstances. You're trying to decide where an entire life should happen, and the bird sounds like it has already made peace with the place. That choice begins with water. No matter what dreams brought you here, they quickly kneel before practical things. You can admire a beautiful stretch of prairie all you like, but if the nearest dependable water lies too far away, your admiration will dry out with the wash basin. So you walk. You scan the ground for greener runs of grass, willow growth, a dark fold in the land, any hint that moisture lingers below the surface. If there is a creek, you note whether it runs steady or only seems lively after rain. A stream that sings sweetly in spring may become a sulking line of mud in late summer. The frontier has a talent for false promises. You test the earth with your boots and eyes. Rich dark topsoil can look like a blessing, and often it is, but you learn not to trust appearance alone. Some land cracks hard after heat. Some lies too low and turns into a gummy mess after storms. Some supports a thick skin of grass roots that will fight every plough tooth you own. On the Great Plains, sod can be so dense that cutting into it feels like trying to farm an old carpet woven by giants. That is not poetry. It is an agricultural insult. Still, you keep reading the ground. To claim a patch of earth in 1860, you're not merely choosing scenery. You're selecting a relationship with wind, water, distance, and labour. A rise in the land might keep your shelter drier, but it leaves you more exposed to harsh winter gusts. A lower spot may offer easier access to water, yet risk flooding, mosquitoes, and that sour smell of standing damp that clings to cloth and lungs alike. Timber nearby can mean fuel, fence posts, and building material. A treeless horizon can mean you will burn twisted grass, dried dung, or anything else that grudgingly agrees to become fire. That is the funny thing about the frontier. Every advantage arrives holding hands with a problem. You kneel and pick up a fist of soil. It crumbles differently depending on where you stand. Sandy in one place, thick and dark in another. Sometimes you rub it between your fingers and bring it closer to your face, as though scent alone might reveal your future. The dirt smells mineral and alive, with a faint sweetness where roots have died back. It also smells like responsibility. That part is harder to explain, but you feel it anyway. Many settlers learn to watch plants as carefully as survey lines. Cottonwoods might hint at underground moisture. Wild plums, choke cherries, or willow growth could suggest a friendlier water table than the bare uplands offered. Thick buffalo grass often signalled fertile sod, though fertile did not mean easy. Historians agree that vegetation served as an informal guidebook for many newcomers, especially those arriving with little scientific training and no elegant set of instruments. You learn from what grows without asking permission. You also learn from what does not. If the ground lies naked and wind skims over it without resistance, your imagination begins producing unpleasant little scenes. Dust creeping through every crack, a dry garden wilting under a white sun, a cow bawling with thirst, children carrying buckets farther than their patience can bear. Even silence speaks here. A silent patch may mean calm. It may mean emptiness. You become very interested in the difference. Surveying land is supposed to sound official and orderly. In reality, for many poor settlers, it feels more like a mixture of guesswork, observation, rumour, and prayer. Legal descriptions may exist, but the body understands terrain long before paper does. You pace out a distance. You squint toward a creek bend. You notice where rainwater must run after a storm. You look for signs of other people too. Wagon tracks, chopped stumps, a half-abandoned camp circle, even old ashes. Good land rarely goes unnoticed for long. This can make every decision feel urgent. Another family might arrive in a week or tomorrow. Suddenly, your private contemplation turns competitive. You do not want to rush into a foolish claim, but you do not have the luxury of endless reflection either. The frontier presses people into premature certainty. Choose now. Regret later. There is something almost modern about that, which is rather annoying. The wind becomes a tutor as well. It moves across open country with an honesty that can feel rude. On some days it smells clean and grassy, cool against your face and sleeves. On other days it carries dust so fine that it settles into the corners of your eyes and between your teeth. You begin to notice how the land breaks or channels it. A shallow draw may offer a little shelter. A stand of scrub can blunt a gust. An exposed ridge can turn a small fire into a practical joke from nature. Where the wind goes, your smoke will go. Where your smoke goes, so will comfort, warmth, and the occasional bit of dignity. That matters more than you think. A home site needs air, but not too much of it. Sun, but not the cruelest full blast. Nearness to water, but not the feverish edge of swampy ground. Access to grazing, but also enough soil worth scratching into crops. A route to neighbours or town if possible, though many found themselves more isolated than the brochures implied. You do not simply want land. You want land that will forgive your inexperience at least once or twice. Sometimes this search involves talking to those already nearby. Their advice may be generous, guarded, or gloriously contradictory. One man swears the higher ground is healthiest. Another says only a fool ignores the creek bottom. A woman with red hands from washing might warn you that one pleasant little stream shrinks to nothing by August. A hunter may mention game trails and sheltering groves. A trader may care less about your wheat prospects than whether a road could reach you. Every opinion contains some truth and some personal bias. Frontier knowledge is often accurate in a very inconveniently partial way. There are stranger signs too. Some settlers watched ant hills, believing they revealed drainage and the character of the soil. Others studied where dew lingered longest in morning. A few swore that the behaviour of livestock told useful secrets, as if a mule possessed hidden geological wisdom. That sounds eccentric, and perhaps it is. But people without money or formal expertise will squeeze information out of anything that stands still long enough. A family starting from nothing cannot afford intellectual snobbery. A mainstream fact of this era sits quietly under all of this searching. Before the Homestead Act of 1862, land acquisition in many frontier regions often required purchase, preemption claims, tenancy arrangements, or complicated local practices rather than the simplified image people later preferred. In 1860, many settlers were trying to secure land through a patchwork of legal means and informal expectations, all while competing with speculators, existing claims, and the simple confusion of undeveloped space. The myth of easy free land came dressed much better than reality, and reality keeps interrupting your thoughts. The sun climbs. Your collar grows damp with sweat. Flies start their little campaign of irritation around animals and faces. You smell leather heating in the light, trampled grass, and the sharp earthy odour released where hooves cut into softer spots. Your shoulders tighten from carrying tools, sacks, or nothing at all except the burden of deciding well. It is remarkable how exhausting choosing can be when error has real consequences. A claim that looks ideal in the morning may reveal flaws by noon. The stream bank is steeper than expected. The good grass thins out too quickly. The nearest timber stand lies farther than your hopeful eye first judged. The ground that seemed gently sloped now looks suspiciously like a channel for storm runoff. Here the prairie teaches a mean little lesson. Scale can deceive you. Distances stretch. A grove that appears half an hour away may consume most of the afternoon. On open country, the eye becomes optimistic. The feet later file a complaint. Yet beauty can still interfere with caution. At a certain hour, the grass ripples in long bands under the wind, silver green and almost liquid. Insects pulse in the warm air. Larks rise. The sky opens so completely that your breathing changes. You can almost feel your mind trying to settle into the place. There is a dangerous comfort in that. Land can charm you before it serves you. Many a poor settler chose with the heart first and discovered later that romance does not haul water. Historians still debate how often settlement decisions were driven by environmental judgment alone, and how often they were shaped more by haste, rumour, visible landmarks, or the pressure of nearby claim activity. The records do not always capture that intimate moment when a family stood in uncertainty and simply decided, enough, here. Some scholars emphasize rational adaptation to local conditions. Others note the powerful role of fear, fatigue, and imitation. You can believe both. Human beings rarely make life-changing choices with clean motives. You walk the edges again. This time you listen harder. The ground has sounds if you're patient. Dry stems whisper against your boots. Crickets rasp. Somewhere water ticks gently over stones. In a damp patch your steps sink with a muffled softness. On firmer ground they sound sharper, almost hollow. A horse tears grass with a steady ripping motion that somehow calms the nerves. You notice smell too. Sour mud by the low edge. Resin if pine or cedar stands nearby. A sweet, wild scent from crushed plants underfoot. Smoke lingering faintly from your own campfire. A place becomes real once it enters your nose and skin. Not just your eyes. Touch matters as much as sight. You stoop to feel bark, scratchy and cool in shadow. You press the heel of your palm into sod and find it springy with roots. You run your fingers through creek water and learn immediately how cold hope can be. You lift a clod and test its weight. You grip your hat when the wind turns sudden and rude. This is how homesteaders read country. not from a polished desk, but from the hand upward. There is also the matter of neighbours, or the absence of them. Too near, and disputes over grazing, boundaries, or water may sour the air. Too far, and sickness or accident becomes terrifyingly private. A broken leg in settled country is a crisis. Broken leg on isolated land can become a family catastrophe. You find yourself counting travel time more than mileage. How long by wagon to a mill, to a store, to someone with a decent saw, a midwife, or a bit of spare seed. Distance out here does not remain abstract for long. It turns into hunger, delay, and loneliness. One quirky tidbit from the frontier is that some families name promising claims before they had built so much as a proper wall. Grand names, often Pleasant Valley, Liberty Farm, Oak View, even when the nearest oak was practically a rumour. There is something very human in that urge. If reality seems rough, rename it with confidence. A title costs nothing. It can even make a windswept patch feel briefly obedient. The prairie may not care what you call it, but the heart sometimes needs a phrase to hang on to. By late afternoon, practical hunger begins nibbling at your judgment. Fatigue can make one spot look as good as any other. That is dangerous. But exhaustion also strips away fantasy, which can help. A place with decent water access, tolerable shelter from prevailing wind, enough workable ground, and a possible route for hauling supplies begins to stand out not as perfect, but as bearable. Bearable is an underrated word in frontier history. Whole family futures were built on bearable. You imagine the daily motions here. Buckets carried from water, laundry boiled, animals tethered, a kitchen garden scratched into the nearest suitable patch, manure piled somewhere downwind, if fortune and sense align, children running, falling, shouting, vanishing briefly behind tall grass, smoke lifting from a roof not yet built. The image is incomplete, shaky, and full of labour, yet it starts to fasten itself to the land. This is how a claim becomes more than geography. It begins attracting routine before routine even exists. Then comes the last quiet test. You stand still. You let the place sit around you. The evening air cools against your neck. Gnats soften into the dim light. Grassheads brush at your boots. Far off, a bird calls from the creek line. The smell of earth deepens as the heat drains away. You study where shadows gather first. You note where the ground keeps a little warmth. You picture rain, frost, wind, hauling, digging, waiting. The land does not answer in words. It answers in sensations, in small tolerances, in its willingness to be read. At some point you know enough. Not everything. Enough. You have found the patch of earth that may not be kind, may not be easy, and may never feel entirely secure, yet offers the raw materials from which a life can be wrestled. Water not too distant. Ground worth trying. Exposure that can be managed. Space for animals, crops, hope, and error. The frontier does not hand you certainty. It allows you a decision. And that is what you finally take. You drive a marker, stake a boundary, or simply let the choice harden inside you first. The act feels both humble and enormous. Around you the prairie still stretches, indifferent and beautiful, smelling of grass, dust, and evening cold. Above, the sky pales towards sunset. The wind moves through the stems with a soft, dry hush, like a crowd discussing your chances. Your hands are dirty, your throat is dry. Your muscles ache from a day spent measuring possibility with the body itself. This ground is not home yet, but it has become your answer. By the time you stop searching and start building, the day feels suddenly much shorter. Light that seemed generous in the morning now looks expensive. Every minute has edges. The open land, which appeared grand and spacious while you were judging it from a distance, becomes very particular once you need it to hold a roof, a fire, bedding, tools, children, food, and the fragile idea of safety. You're not building a dream cottage. You're trying to keep darkness, weather, and discouragement from walking straight in, so you choose the first exact spot with more care than style. A slight rise helps, if you can manage it, enough to keep heavy rain from pooling around your floor. You look for ground firm underfoot, not too stony if digging is required, not too exposed if the wind changes mood. On some frontiers, there is timber near enough for a rough cabin. On others, wood is so scarce that even a straight branch looks like aristocracy. In the treeless stretches, families cut sod bricks from the prairie itself, lifting the thick root-bound earth in heavy rectangles and stacking them into walls. It sounds clever because it was clever. It also sounds exhausting because it was that too. You begin with what the land allows. If there is timber, the work starts with axes, saws, and much grunting. Trees do not simply become walls because you wish nicely at them. They must be felled, trimmed, dragged, lifted, and fitted. Bark roughens your palms, sap sticks to your skin, sawdust settles on sleeves and in the damp hollow of your throat. The smell of fresh-cut wood rises sweet and sharp, almost cheerful. Though the labour itself is anything but cheerful. A tree gives shade for free, but boards and logs demand payment in muscle. If there is no timber, sod becomes your unwilling partner. You cut long strips or block-like sections with a breaking plough or spade, then heave them up one by one. Each piece is dense with roots and dark soil, heavier than it looks, as though the prairie resents every removal. When stacked, the blocks make thick walls that can keep out wind and even offer decent insulation. Yet sod crumbles, sheds dirt, harbours insects, and gives the whole place the faint smell of earth after rain, even when you might prefer the smell of anything else. Frontier luxury often means choosing which inconvenience you can tolerate best. The first structure is rarely graceful. That is putting it kindly. It may be a dugout cut partly into a bank, a shanty of boards and salvaged canvas, a brush shelter, a tiny log rectangle, or a low sod house with a roof that inspires exactly as much confidence as the person who built it. Some roofs are laid with poles, brush, and more sod. Some are patched with cloth, hides, or tarred material when available. Cracks are inevitable. Gaps appear where light should not. The doorway may hang crooked from the start. The floor, if there is one beyond packed earth, can wait until waiting is no longer possible. Still, the work carries a blunt excitement. A wall means boundary. A roof means intention. You stop being merely present on the land and start arguing with it in structural form. The tools in your hands matter enormously. Axe heads loosen, handles splinter. A dull saw can make a short task feel like a personal feud. Nails are treasured in a way modern people would find almost poetic. A handful of nails can save hours of improvisation. A missing hammer, bent hinge, or split auger handle can hold up half the day. Historians are confident about one thing here. Tool scarcity shaped homestead construction at every level. Often more than later, nostalgia admitted. Plenty of families built not what they imagined, but what their tools permitted. That is frontier architecture in plain language. You build the house your circumstances deserve. Sometimes neighbours come to help, especially if they are near enough and not overwhelmed by their own demands. A cabin raising, even a humble one, can turn into a brief pocket of community. Men lift walls into place. Women organise food, manage children, fetch water, tie bundles, steady loose boards, and do the 1,000 invisible tasks that let visible tasks occur. Young people carry, hold, chase animals, and attempt usefulness with mixed results. The sounds mingle into a rough music, hammering, sawing, short instructions, a baby crying, someone laughing when a log rolls wrong, someone muttering because of course it would roll wrong now. Shared labour feels warm until everyone goes home, then the structure is yours, along with every flaw, if no help comes. The house rises slower and with more compromises. That can mean dangerous compromises. A wall slightly out of square, a roofline not quite true, a hearth improvised in haste, a chimney made from sod, sticks plastered with mud, stone if you're fortunate, or some desperate combination of all three. Fire inside a frontier shelter is both necessity and threat. It warms soup, dries socks, cooks pork, and invites disaster if sparks catch where they should not. A family may fear freezing at night and burning by dawn. The stove or fireplace becomes the household heart only because hearts are known to cause trouble. The interior is spare from the first moment, maybe a bed frame if lumber exists. More often a pile of bedding on poles, rope, straw, grass, or directly on the floor, a crude table from split boards, boxes serving as stools, pegs driven into wall gaps for hanging clothes, tools, or hope, a shelf or two. If there is time usually objects. The room smells of cut wood, fresh earth, sweat, smoke, damp cloth, and food cooked too near bedding. Privacy is nearly fictional. Comfort is mostly a rumour passed between more established families, and yet stepping inside changes something. The wind dulls by a fraction. Your voice sounds different in an enclosed space. A pot set on a surface instead of the ground feels almost civilized. A sleeping child under some kind of roof, however rough, makes the whole enterprise seem less mad than it did at noon. Shelter is not only physical, it alters the mind. Even a poor wall gives shape to fear. One odd frontier detail that appears in memoirs is the battle against what lived in the walls and ceilings of these first homes. In sod houses especially, seeds sometimes sprouted from the very roof after a rain, sending little green shoots overhead as though the prairie wished to continue decorating. Insects found their way in with insulting ease. Mice considered themselves co-owners. Birds occasionally investigated the eaves without invitation. The house might protect you from the weather while still feeling in active conversation with the outdoors. Nature never really accepted the hint. The work of sealing the place can become endless. Mud is packed into cracks. Cloth is stuffed into seams. More sod is laid where the roof looks suspiciously bright. Hides or paper may be fastened over openings. Windows, if present at all, are often small, costly, and precious. Many early shelters use oiled paper, cloth, or greased skins to admit a little light. It is a very frontier arrangement. You achieve dimness at significant effort. You also discover quickly that building materials behave differently than optimism suggested. Fresh logs shrink as they dry, opening new gaps. Sod walls settle, mud plaster cracks. Rain exposes weak spots with terrible honesty. A brisk wind can find every loose edge by instinct. It is one thing to plan a house while standing in daylight. It is another to hear cold air sifting through the wall after sunset and realize the house has opinions of its own. Scholars still disagree on how common truly permanent first homes were among settlers starting from little in this era, because memoirs and later local histories often polished the facts. Some families improved rough shelters surprisingly fast. Others spent long stretches in temporary structures they had hoped to leave behind in weeks. Memory has a habit of turning prolonged discomfort into a colourful anecdote once grandchildren are listening. At the time, though, a leaky roof remains a leaky roof, no matter how heroic you later sound. As evening pulls closer, the urgency sharpens. You need a fire arranged safely enough to use. You need bedding up off the worst damp if possible. You need food within reach, and tools where they will not vanish in darkness. The animals must be considered too. A horse or ox left carelessly can wander, injure itself, or remind you at dawn that the frontier charges interest on sloppy choices. So you move with that tired, mechanical focus known to all people who have surpassed exhaustion and found duty still standing there. Your body complains in several languages at once. Hands burn from friction. Knees ache from kneeling on packed dirt or chopped stubble. Shoulders throb from lifting what should have required 2 more people. Dust clings to the sweat at your temples. There is a stripe of dried mud on one sleeve and a new tear near a cuff. Smoke gets into your eyes. The back of your neck feels salted and hot from the day. When you straighten fully for the first time in a while, the sky seems almost to sway above you. That is how fatigue introduces itself politely. Yet there are moments of absurd humour, because there have to be. Perhaps a board you finally fit correctly slides down and lands with theatrical contempt. Perhaps a hat blows off at exactly the wrong moment and skims away across the grass like it has chosen freedom. Perhaps supper tastes so strongly of smoke that everyone briefly pretends this was intentional, a refined frontier flavour. Gentle sarcasm survives where elegance does not. Marvellous, you think. A palace of dirt and determination. But it is your palace. Mainstream history often emphasises the symbolic importance of home building on the frontier, and for good reason. A structure was proof of occupation, a practical defence against weather, and sometimes part of meeting claim requirements under local rules or later federal law. Improvement mattered. A family that built visibly showed commitment, labour, and intention to remain. The house was never only a house. It was an argument made out of materials. Inside, as dusk thickens, objects begin finding their first places. The skillet here. The water bucket there. Blankets in that corner away from the draft, if such a corner exists. Flour where mice might be discouraged. Though mice are rarely respectful of plans, a Bible or family keepsake may come out last, not because it is unimportant, but because it feels too delicate for the chaos of active building. When it does appear, laid on a shelf or tucked into a box, the room gains a strange steadiness. One familiar thing can anchor an entire unfamiliar space. Sound changes again after dark. Outside. Insects pulse in the grass. Animals shift and snort. The wind rubs against the walls with a soft, dry hiss. Inside. Every small motion becomes noticeable. The lid on the pot rattles. A child turns in bedding. Someone taps ash from a pipe. A loose pole overhead gives a tiny complaint. You listen for leaks, cracks, and suspicious silences. New shelter has to be learned by ear. Touch teaches lessons too. The packed floor is hard through thin soles. Wall surfaces scrape or crumble under your fingers depending on whether they are wood, sod, or mud. Blankets feel rougher when the air cools. A cup of something hot, even weak coffee or broth, warms your hands with almost embarrassing pleasure. Little comforts grow oversized on the frontier. A dry place to sit can feel nearly luxurious. A place to hang wet clothing above the fire becomes strategy, not convenience. The smell indoors becomes its own frontier atmosphere. Smoke first, always. Then warm iron, damp wool, tired bodies, and the faint animal scent carried in on boots. If the walls are sod, there is also that deep earthy odour, dark and slightly sweet. If the roof leaked during construction, or the mud used for chinking remains wet, the whole room may smell like fresh rain trapped in a box. It is not elegant, but it is alive. This shelter has not yet become ordinary enough to ignore. A curious little truth is that many homesteaders cared about appearance sooner than outsiders might guess. Even in the roughest first houses, people swept floors, straightened bedding, hung cloth to soften a corner, arranged crockery carefully, or whitewashed walls when materials allowed. Order was not frivolous. Order fought despair. A neat shelf and a swept threshold told the mind that life had not slipped entirely into survival alone. Beauty might enter quietly, wearing an apron and carrying a broom. You feel that instinct now. Once the most urgent tasks are done, you adjust one thing, then another. A pot moved closer, a blanket shaken out, a tool placed where morning hands can find it. These gestures are small, but they transform the structure from a work site into a beginning. The roof may sag a little, the draught may be rude, the chimney may look like a theological test. Still, this is no longer only timber, sod, mud, and hurry. It has become inhabited. Outside, night settles across the claim with wide prairie calm. The air cools sharply enough to sting your nose. Stars gather above the roof you made with whatever strength remained in you. The ground underfoot is uneven. The doorway hangs a touch crooked. Somewhere beyond the walls, the darkness keeps all its old distances, yet inside there is a fire glow, dim and orange, touching the rough surfaces and making them seem for a moment almost gentle. You lower yourself to rest. The bed is hard. The room is close. A little dirt falls from somewhere it should not. Still, you're off the bare ground, inside a shelter raised by your own labour, breathing air that no longer moves freely across your face. The frontier has not become friendly. It has simply allowed you one small, defended space. In a world of exposure, that is no small thing. And as the last light fades from the cracks and seams, you understand what building before dark was really about. Not comfort, not pride, not even permanence, not yet. It was about creating one place where the night must pause before entering. Morning begins with thirst before it begins with thought. Your mouth feels dry from smoke and sleep. and the first chore is already waiting outside the door. Water does not stroll politely into a frontier home and offer its services. It has to be fetched, carried, guarded, heated, rationed, and respected with an intensity that people in easier circumstances rarely imagine. The day opens on the sound of a bucket handle creaking in your grip and the cool sting of dawn air against your face. You go to water again, and then again, and again. That repetition shapes the whole rhythm of homestead life. A creek may lie nearby, but nearby on the frontier still means effort. A spring may be cleaner, yet harder to reach. A shallow well might exist eventually, though at first many families relied on surface sources and took their chances with silt, insects, and whatever else the stream had recently decided to carry. Water is drinking, cooking, washing, cleaning, livestock, gardening, and illness all at once. Every spill feels personal. The physical sensation of hauling it settles into your body quickly. Fingers pinch around metal or wood handles, shoulders angle to balance the slosh. The skin across your palms toughens. If the path is muddy, each step threatens a ridiculous little disaster. If the ground is dry, dust puffs around your boots and clings to damp hems. In cold weather, the handles burn your hands with chill. In hot weather, the bucket seems to grow heavier with every yard. Water is simple, people say. People say many foolish things. Breakfast begins in that practical spirit. Nothing about the meal is accidental. Fuel must be used carefully. Flour is measured with caution. Bacon grease, salt pork, cornmeal, beans, or biscuits appear depending on supply and luck. Coffee, when available, becomes half comfort, half religion. The smell of it rising in a rough shelter can make even a hard morning feel briefly manageable. Smoke from the fire curls through the room and clings to cloth and hair. A skillet hisses, grease pops. Somebody reaches too soon for something hot and jerks back with a muttered complaint. Food is never just food here. It is accounting. You count sacks, jars, handfuls, and days. You wonder how long the flour will last. You check the bacon supply with a seriousness usually reserved for legal matters. Dried beans look humble until you realise how many suppers they may have to become. Molasses, if you have it, is almost luxurious. Lard matters. Salt matters. A cracked barrel lid or a clever mouse can alter the mood of a whole week. Frontier hunger is not always dramatic at first. Often it creeps in as worry, as the steady narrowing of choices. A mainstream historical truth sits right at the centre of this. Many settlers beginning with little cash depended on purchased staples while trying to establish crops, and the first season or two could be especially precarious. Even on good land, fields did not magically turn into full pantries overnight. Families ate what they had brought, what they could trade for, what they could hunt, and what gardens could slowly provide. The dream of self-sufficiency usually arrived late, wearing muddy boots, so after breakfast, the labour truly starts. You repair, you dig, you chop, you drag, you sort seed, you check animals, you patch a leak, you clear ground, you move stones, you wrestle roots, you attempt order in a place that has no natural interest in being orderly. The homestead asks the body for everything it has, then suggests a few additional tasks. Work begins early because light is valuable, and it continues because stopping too long means tomorrow becomes worse. Clearing land can feel like a contest against an invisible opponent. In wooded areas, stumps remain after the first brave cutting, glaring at you from the earth like old arguments. In sod country, roots cling and resist. Prairie grass does not surrender politely. The soil may be rich, but the top layer has been woven together over centuries, and your plough, ox, or own back must argue with every inch. The sound of metal biting ground becomes a daily soundtrack. Scrape, thunk, drag, lift, repeat. You feel the vibration up through the handle into wrists and elbows. By noon, sweat has changed the texture of your clothing. Linen or wool sticks in places that should remain private. Dust gathers at the neck, cuffs, and knees. The smell of the day thickens. Warm earth, horse sweat, leather, sun on cut grass. smoke still trapped in your shirt from breakfast. If the wind is kind, it cools the damp skin at your temples. If the wind is rude, it blows grit into your eyes and keeps moving without apology. You pause only because the body insists. The meal at midday is smaller, plainer, and more hurried than the evening one, if evening can even claim that dignity. Cold bread, leftover beans, salt meat, maybe a bit of onion or dried apple if the household is fortunate. Water, always counted. Sometimes coffee kept warm too long. The taste is not exciting, but excitement is not the frontier standard. Sustaining the body is. One quirky detail from frontier life is the number of creative substitutes people used when proper supplies ran short. Coffee might be stretched or replaced with roasted grains, chicory, or other local improvisations. Sweetness could come from sorghum or molasses when sugar felt too expensive for ordinary use. Fuel might include twisted hay, corn cobs, buffalo chips, or dried brush when wood was scarce. Nothing was allowed to remain only one thing if it could be persuaded into becoming another. The frontier encouraged a kind of domestic alchemy. Water returns to the centre of the day again in washing and cooking. Clothes do not wash themselves, though they do become filthy with admirable speed. Hands need cleaning before food preparation, though perfect cleanliness is a luxury. Dishes must be managed with limited water and very limited soap. Soap itself can be homemade, harsh, and faintly hostile to the skin. Made from lye and animal fat, it gets the job done in the same way a strict aunt gets a child ready for church, efficiently, but not gently. Your hands show the evidence. Knuckles dry and crack. Nails collect dirt that seems eternal. Small cuts sting when lye or salt finds them. The daily grind is not dramatic enough to become legend in the way battles and speeches do, yet it is the machinery on which survival actually runs. Historians have long noted that frontier success depended less on heroic moments than on relentless routine. Fetching water, tending fires, stretching stores, protecting seed, watching weather, repairing tools before they fail entirely. The work is repetitive because life depends on repetition. There is a strange humility in that. Animals complicate everything, naturally. A horse, ox, cow, pig, or chickens can support the household, but only if the household supports them first. Water for them, feed or grazing, shelter of some kind, fencing, however crude, constant vigilance. A cow can kick over a pail with insulting speed. Chickens wander exactly where they should not. Pigs possess the moral seriousness of comedians. Livestock are wealth with appetites attached. You may spend part of the afternoon trying to protect a garden. Those first little rows matter enormously. Potatoes, corn, beans, onions, turnips, cabbage, perhaps pumpkins if season and seed cooperate. The garden is hopeful work because it imagines the future in edible form. It is also anxious work because weather, insects, poor soil, stray animals, and plain bad luck all take an interest. You kneel in dirt, fingers pressing seed or pulling weeds, and the sun moves slowly across your shoulders. The smell here is close and green, mixed with warm soil and crushed leaves. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how effectively many newcomers adapted old farming practices to unfamiliar environments in the first years. Researchers still dispute how much of early failure came from poor technique, how much from environmental extremes, and how much from sheer lack of capital to absorb setbacks. The truth likely varied from one claim to the next. The land did not grade on kindness, and people arrived with unequal knowledge. It is easy to say work harder. It is harder to explain drought. By late afternoon, the body enters a different state. Motions become more automatic. You lift without dramatizing the lift. You walk to the water source with the numb efficiency of habit already forming. Your lower back complains steadily, like a relative who has settled in for a long visit. Children, if present, are folded into the labour too. Carry this, watch that, bring kindling, hold the pail, chase the chickens out of the wrong patch again. Frontier childhood does not float free from household need. There are tiny comforts hidden in the grind. The sound of water finally pouring into a barrel, the feel of a dry shirt after one soaked in sweat, the first mouthful of something hot after hours outside, a breeze across the face when clouds pass over the sun, the clean weight of a sharpened tool in the hand, a loaf that rises better than expected. These moments are small, but they glow out of proportion because the rest of the day is so relentlessly useful. Then evening arrives carrying another round of necessities. Supper needs fuel, water, and planning. If meat is scarce, meals lean heavily on starch and whatever can be coaxed from stores or garden. Beans again, bread again, cornmeal again, salted meat if available, stew when ingredients can be united into a common purpose. The smell of cooking reaches beyond the doorway and briefly makes the place feel generous. Smoke drifts. Steam fogs a small window or darkens the air above the pot. Hunger sharpens everything. Even plain food tastes larger after labour. You eat with exhaustion sitting beside you. Conversation, if it comes, stays close to practical matters. How much flour remains, whether the roof seem held, whether the creek seems lower, whether the animal feed must be stretched, whether the weather smell in the air suggests rain. Frontier families read the atmosphere the way others read newspapers. The smell before a storm, metallic and cool. The heavy stillness before heat breaks. The sharper bite that hints at an early frost. Daily life is never far from the sky. One especially revealing frontier habit was the saving of nearly everything. Bacon drippings, scraps of cloth, bones for broth, ashes for soap making, twine, corks, nails, broken handles that might be repaired, sacks turned into towels or clothing patches. Waste was a kind of sin when supply lines were long and money short. The household became a place of transformation, where leftovers waited nervously to discover their next assignment. After supper, more work. Of course more work. Dishes in dim light. Feeding the fire for one more boiling. Mending. Sharpening. Sorting seed. Checking the animals again. Bringing in what should not sit overnight in damp air. Laying out clothes that can be worn tomorrow without too much argument. The hands continue even when the mind has already begun to drift. This is how the frontier consumes a day. Not in one grand demand, but in dozens of ordinary claims. Touch grows important again as darkness settles. The roughness of a work shirt peeled from tired shoulders, the ache in the arches of your feet, the hard bench under your weight, the warmth of a tin cup, the softness of a child's hair for one brief second while passing behind them. Human tenderness exists here, but it often hides inside task and motion. A blanket tucked better, a plate served first to the most spent person, a boot set near the fire to dry. Care becomes practical because practical care is what the day allows. Sometimes there is music, a hymn sung softly, a fiddle. If someone carried one against all good economic sense, a low murmur of prayer. More often there is simply the hush that follows heavy labour. Insects outside, the creak of the structure, a horse shifting, wind working at the walls. The smell indoors deepens with smoke, cooked grain, damp wool, and cooling iron. A frontier evening has texture even in silence. You think about tomorrow despite yourself. There will be more water to carry, more food to stretch, more land to tame. The grind has no elegant conclusion because it is not designed as a story. It is designed as continuity. Homesteaders starting from nothing did not survive by dramatic inspiration each morning. They survived by returning to the same essential labours until those labours built a margin thin enough to protect them from the next surprise. Survival is repetitive because the body is repetitive. It needs drinking, feeding, warming, resting, and starting over. And still, for all its weariness, the routine begins to shape the place into something lived in rather than merely occupied. Buckets wear a path to water, tools acquire resting spots. The fire draws people inward at the same hour. The garden rows start to mean more than bare possibility. Even hunger becomes more legible. You know now what the household consumes in a day, what can be spared and what cannot. Knowledge arrives through repetition, not lecture. At last you lower yourself to rest. The body resists at first. Still humming with labour, hands twitch with remembered motions. Your shoulders hold the ghost of the bucket yoke or tool handle. The air smells faintly of ashes and supper. Outside, the darkness is broad and cool. Inside, Every object seems to have earned its place for another night. The frontier has not become easier, but the day has taught you its terms more clearly. What life was really like in these hours was not romantic freedom under endless skies. It was thirst met by effort, hunger met by calculation, and survival assembled from chores so ordinary they almost disappear in the telling. Yet those chores were the truth. They were the bones of the homestead. They were how tomorrow remained possible. And by the time sleep finally reaches you, your last thought is not about glory or history or the grand promise of the land. It is about water in the morning. Before sunrise, the shelter is already busy in ways the outside world will never fully notice. The fire needs coaxing back to life. Water must be warmed. Dough may need mixing. A child may wake coughing. A shirt with a torn seam waits accusingly in the dim light. The room smells of ashes, wool, last night's food, and that deep, lived-in scent of close quarters where work and sleep share the same air. Long before the field or stable claims the day, the household has already begun its quiet machinery. Much of that machinery runs through women's hands. That is one of the clearest truths of homestead life in 1860. Frontier households depended on women's labour for food preparation, clothing maintenance, child care, cleaning, nursing, preservation, and often fieldwork besides. The romantic image of a cabin wife serenely stirring a pot while history happens elsewhere misses the point entirely. History is happening at the pot. It is happening at the wash kettle, the cradle, the mending basket, and the churn. The house is not a retreat from frontier labour. It is one of its hardest workplaces. The morning meal alone can feel like a campaign. Flour has to be measured carefully. Water must be hauled, heated, and used with discipline. The fire needs tending so it cooks without wasting fuel or smoking everyone half blind. Bread, mush, biscuits, pork, coffee, or whatever is available must be prepared under conditions that would make a city kitchen weep softly into its polished surfaces. The tools are limited, the room is crowded, the smoke goes where it pleases, yet somehow breakfast must emerge on time because hungry people do not become more charming as the hour advances. You move quickly because delay multiplies. Every task touches another one. If bread is late, work outside begins late. If the water is not heated now, washing becomes harder later. If food is not set aside, someone will come in hungry and find only inconvenience. The frontier trains a person to think in chains of consequence. A missed stitch becomes a larger tear. A larger tear becomes poor winter protection. A missed washing day becomes a heap of dirt and cloth no one wishes to face. A skipped chance to dry herbs or save fat or patch trousers will present itself later as a much nastier problem. That mental load is its own labour. You carry it all day. The physical side is relentless too. Clothes do not merely become dirty here. They become assaulted, dust, sweat, grease, soot, animal smell, mud, milk, blood from small cuts, and whatever the weather flings at the household all settle into fabric. Washing them requires hauling water, heating it, scrubbing with harsh soap, wringing by hand, lifting heavy wet cloth, hanging it where wind and sun may help, then snatching it back if weather threatens. The skin on your hands pays the price. Knuckles redden, nails split, wrists ache from twisting and lifting. In cold months, the steam from the wash kettle feels heavenly until you step back into air that bites through damp sleeves. The smell around wash day is vivid and unmistakable. Lye soap with its blunt, alkaline sting. Wet cloth. Smoke from the fire under the kettle. Steam carrying traces of sweat and earth back out of the garments. It is not a pleasant perfume, but it is the smell of fighting chaos. Clean linen on the frontier is not elegance. It is victory. Mending follows close behind. Socks wear through, knees tear, seams open, aprons fray. Shirts lose buttons with almost supernatural regularity. A sewing kit becomes as valuable as many heavier tools because fabric is expensive and replacement slower than wear. You sit in dim evening light or steal moments in the afternoon. Needle in hand, working thread through cloth while your shoulders droop with fatigue. The sound is tiny. Thread pulling, scissors clipping, fabric shifting under tired fingers. Quiet work, but essential. A quirky truth from the period is that dresses, shirts, and household textiles often lived several lives. A worn garment might be cut down for a smaller child, then cut again into patching pieces, then turned into rags, quilt squares, bandages, or stuffing. Cloth was too precious to retire gracefully. It simply descended through new ranks of usefulness. Frontier households were masters of textile reincarnation. Cooking never really ends either. One meal leads into the next day's planning. Fat must be saved, leftovers watched, milk handled before it turns, meat salted, smoked, or cooked in time, fruit, if available, preserved, vegetables dried or stored, butter churned, cheese made when possible, bread baked again because bread always needs baking again. The stove or hearth dominates the day not just through heat, but through constant decision-making. What is eaten now? What is saved? What can be stretched? What must be used before spoilage? What can be traded? What should be hidden from mice and children alike? Historians widely note that domestic production on the frontier often blurred any neat division between home and economy. Butter, eggs, sewing, garden produce, laundry work, boarding, or extra food preparation could contribute directly to household survival and even small cash income. Women's labour was not merely supportive in a sentimental sense. It could be central to whether a family endured a bad season. That economic reality was obvious to the household even when later public stories preferred to celebrate more visible forms of labour. Then there is childcare, which on the frontier is not one task but 20 folding into each other all day long. A baby needs feeding while bread is rising. A toddler wanders toward the fire at exactly the wrong moment. Older children need washing, dressing, guiding, correcting, comforting, and assigning small useful jobs before they invent dangerous amusements. Illness makes everything heavier. Teething, fever, stomach troubles, accidents, coughs, rashes. All the ordinary afflictions of childhood become more frightening when doctors are distant and medicines uncertain. You learn to listen while working. A different cry means a different problem. A sudden silence can be even worse. The household ear grows sharp. You hear the scrape of a chair that means climbing, the shuffle near the hearth that means trouble, the outdoor hush that means children are either deeply occupied or about to become memorable. Tenderness exists in these moments, but it is braided tightly with vigilance. Love on the frontier often sounds like, "Not there, not that, come back here, hold still, eat this, let me see it." Nursing the sick is a labour of patience and improvisation. You cool foreheads with cloths, stir broths, brew teas, change bedding, wash bodies, air out rooms when weather permits, and pray that the symptoms mean something passing rather than something that will redraw the family's future. Herbal remedies, household recipes, patent medicines, and inherited knowledge all mingle uneasily. Historians still debate how effective many home treatments truly were, because records are uneven and memory tends to praise what comforted even when it did not cure. What can be said with confidence is that women often stood at the centre of care, carrying the emotional and practical burden of illness with very little relief. The house itself demands constant management. Dirt enters with every boot and gust. Ash gathers. Grease spatters. Crumbs attract pests. Bedding must be aired when possible. Floors swept. If there is a floor to sweep rather than packed earth to smooth. Utensils scrubbed. Containers checked for spoilage. Water barrels covered. Candles conserved. The space is small, yet it produces disorder with astonishing efficiency. Cleanliness is more difficult here than outsiders like to imagine. That does not mean people did not value it. Quite the opposite. It simply cost more effort. One of the more intimate sensory truths of this life is how touch dominates it. Rough cloth against the wrist, a hot kettle handle through a folded rag, soap biting into cracks in the skin, a child's feverish forehead, damp sheets in winter air, flour dust drying the fingertips, hair being braided, faces being washed, sleeves being rolled, blankets being pulled tight. Domestic labour is manual in the deeper sense. It passes through the hands almost continuously, and yet women's work does not always remain indoors. During planting, harvest, animal tending, or emergencies, The boundary between household labour and field labour thins to almost nothing. Women may milk cows, gather eggs, carry water to workers, tend gardens, help in the fields, ride for assistance, keep accounts, manage poultry, and still return to cook, mend, and care for children. The idea that one person belongs to the home while another belongs to the land sounds tidy. Frontier life was rarely tidy. Fatigue can become almost dreamlike by late afternoon. The body continues, but the mind drifts in flashes. You stir a pot while thinking about soap grease. You patch a shirt while listening for the boil over. You hush a child while watching bread crust darken. Multitasking is a modern word for a very old frontier problem. Too many needs, too few hands, and no polite way to excuse yourself from any of it. Gentle humour survives somehow. A loaf may collapse in a manner that feels personally insulting. Butter may refuse to come together when the day is already over full. Chickens may invade the wrong room with impossible confidence. A carefully cleaned child may reappear seconds later, wearing enough mud to suggest artistic ambition. You laugh, or at least breathe out sharply through your nose, because the alternative is a dramatic speech no one has energy to hear. One scholarly uncertainty concerns how far regional differences shaped women's frontier routines. Researchers have shown that daily work varied significantly depending on climate, ethnicity, class background, access to markets, local ecology, and whether a family lived in timber country, prairie, mountain settlement, or near an emerging town. There was no single frontier woman's day. However much later legend tried to flatten experience into one sturdy figure in a bonnet. Still, the common thread remains unmistakable. The work was constant, necessary, and often undervalued by anyone not depending on it. Evening does not bring release so much as a shift in type. Supper must still be produced, children settled, lamps trimmed, tomorrow's ingredients considered, wet clothing moved nearer the fire, a torn hem finally addressed. Maybe there is a moment for reading scripture, writing a letter, or sitting still with a cup in hand while the room quiets. More often the stillness lasts less than a minute before some forgotten need remembers itself. There are emotional burdens too, though they rarely announce themselves grandly. Isolation, homesickness, the wearing stress of scarcity, the expectation to be steady when others are frightened, the ache of caring for everyone while receiving little privacy in return. Many frontier women wrote of loneliness as a physical sensation, a heaviness that settled over the room when the chores briefly paused and there was finally time to feel. Others found deep satisfaction in competence, in seeing the household function because of their effort. Both truths can live together comfortably enough. Pride and weariness often share a bench. A small but telling frontier detail is the importance of preserving tiny signs of order or beauty amid relentless use. Clean curtains, if any existed, a polished spoon, a braided rug from scrap cloth, a neatly made bed even in a poor room, dried flowers tucked somewhere safe. These gestures were not shallow decoration. They asserted that the home was more than a workshop for survival. Human beings have always wanted usefulness and grace to sit at the same table, even if the table itself is handmade and slightly uneven. By candlelight, sewing becomes slower. Shadows thicken in corners. The flame trembles when the door opens. The room smells of tallow, smoke, and cooling food. Your back aches from bending. Eyes strain to follow the line of thread. Still, the work continues because tomorrow will arrive without sympathy. On the frontier, postponement is a luxury item. When at last the house settles, the silence feels earned. Not complete silence, of course. A kettle shifts as it cools. Someone coughs in sleep. Wind rubs softly at the wall. A mouse, ambitious as ever, considers its options. But the larger motions are done. The children are down. The dishes stacked. The hearth lowered. Mending folded away. There is a narrow band of time when the day loosens its grip and you can feel the cost of having held everything together. What life was really like in this hidden centre of the homestead was not quaint domesticity. It was management under pressure. It was craft, endurance, memory, vigilance, and care repeated until repetition itself became a form of strength. The home did not run in the background. It was the background, the foreground, and most of the middle as well. So when sleep finally begins to draw the edges of the room softer, you rest in a place kept alive by countless acts that leave little monument behind. A seam closed, a fire banked, a fever watched, bread divided, water heated, mud swept, tears quieted, tomorrow prepared. The work may be called ordinary. That only means people forgot to look closely enough. Children on a homestead do not stay ornamental for long. The land has no interest in sentimental ideas about endless play, and the household cannot afford many idle hands, however small those hands may be. So childhood bends early toward usefulness. You see it in the morning light when a little boy drags in kindling almost as long as his arm, or a girl stands on a box to stir something carefully while an adult watches the fire. The tasks may start small, but they start soon. That is the plain truth of growing up from nothing in 1860. A child learns the sounds of labour almost as early as language. Bucket handles knocking against each other. A rooster with very firm opinions. The scrape of a chair over rough boards. The heavy breathing of a horse being harnessed. The low hum of adults discussing weather, seed, sickness, and money in voices meant not to worry anyone, which of course worries everyone. Even play picks up the rhythms of work. Sticks become ploughs. Mud becomes a kitchen. A patch of grass turns into an imaginary herd. Children copy what fills the air around them. Their education begins in observation. Watch how the dough looks. Listen for the bucket when it is full. Do not stand there near the kicking end. Keep away from the blade. Shut the gate. Come here now. These are the first frontier lessons, delivered briskly and often repeated. A child learns not from polished theory, but from consequence. A forgotten latch means chickens scatter. A dropped pail means more work. A wandering toddler near the fire can stop a room with one shout. Safety has to be taught in constant little corrections because danger is woven through the ordinary. The frontier is not only risky during storms or accidents, it is risky while carrying wood, boiling water, feeding stock, and stepping into the wrong place at the wrong moment. Mainstream historians are clear on this much. Children in rural 19th century households worked from an early age, and their labour contributed materially to family survival. The specific tasks varied by age, sex, season, and region. But the principle did not. Frontier families needed help, and childhood was shaped accordingly. Modern ideas about protecting children from responsibility would have seemed strange luxuries to many homesteaders. The chores begin gently enough in some homes, gathering eggs, bringing chips or dried dung for fuel, watching a baby while someone needs bread, carrying messages across the yard, picking berries, holding the cow steady, at least in theory, while milking, fetching water in smaller pails, shelling peas or beans, picking oakum from rope, carding wool, winding thread, pulling weeds. Small task, but many of them. The day trains a child's body almost without asking permission, and the body notices. Bare feet toughen in summer. Hands learn the feel of rough wood, damp cloth, grain sacks, and warm eggs fresh from the nest. Sun darkens noses and necks. Hair smells of smoke, wind, and outside air. Knees pick up scratches from grass, boards, and eager climbing. Sleep comes quickly because energy has been spent honestly and completely. A frontier child is often tired in a way that is both healthy and unfair. Not all labour feels heavy, though some chores carry a kind of pride. A child trusted to lead a gentle cow or stir a pot without spilling may stand taller afterward. Being useful creates identity. It tells you that the family depends on you in some measure, and children are often hungry for that feeling. They want to be counted among the capable. Of course, they also want to disappear the moment a more unpleasant chore is assigned. Human nature remains charmingly consistent across centuries. Schooling exists, but irregularly. That is putting it kindly. In some places there may be a local schoolhouse later. Perhaps a rough structure shared by scattered families, with lessons offered seasonally or interrupted by weather and work demands. In many homesteading situations, especially in the first stages, education happens at home when time and exhaustion permit. A mother, father, older sibling, or passing neighbour may teach letters, Sums, Bible reading, handwriting, or a bit of geography from a treasured book already losing its cover, slate, chalk, scraps of paper, and memory do much of the work. The problem is not that people do not value learning. Many do, deeply. The problem is that the cow still needs tending even when arithmetic would be improving your character. Planting and harvest do not pause because spelling matters. A child may know letters and still miss weeks or months of formal instruction because weather, distance, illness, clothing shortages, or plain family necessity intervene. Historians still debate how much frontier education advanced social mobility in the short term, because the gap between aspiration and access could be painfully wide. A family might believe fiercely in schooling while still using every daylight hour for survival. One quirky frontier detail is how treasured even a single book could become in a remote household. A Bible, almanac, primer, geography, hymn book, or an old volume of poetry might be read again and again until parts of it lived in the family's speech. Children sometimes absorbed fragments of language far grander than their daily surroundings, because one battered book kept introducing them to another world. Imagine memorizing elegant lines while swatting flies and waiting to haul water. The contrast has its own charm. Games survive anyway. They have to. Children invent joy from almost nothing because they are specialists in that field. A hoop rolled with a stick, a rag doll, whittled animals, pebbles, a swing tied to the right branch if there is a right branch, running games in the yard, hide and seek among wagons, woodpiles, or grass high enough to feel like an ocean. Winter may bring sleds improvised from boards, or simply the thrilling foolishness of sliding where adults told you not to. Laughter breaks out around labour, not separate from it. The sound of children at play on a homestead is bright and startling against the slower music of adult work. A burst of giggles near the water barrel, bare feet thumping, a mock argument over nothing at all, the shriek of triumph when something simple works, like a wheel rolling straight or a frog being spotted in the grass. Then, just as quickly, the household reclaims them. Bring that here, watch your sister, go call him in, stir this, carry those. Frontier childhood is a dance between sudden freedom and immediate usefulness. The emotional life of children in these settings can be hard to read because memoirs often smooth the roughest edges, especially when written later. Still, traces remain. There is wonder, clearly, wide skies, animals, storms, strange plants, endless ground to explore, stars bright enough to make the night feel crowded. There is also fear, illness, isolation, harsh weather, family tension when supplies run low, the knowledge that adult worry means something even if no one explains it. Children are keen observers of mood. They know when the room feels different. Touch tells part of the story, the weight of a younger sibling on one hip, the scratch of straw bedding, the heat of a cup pressed into cold hands, the sting of soap on a dirty face before Sunday or visiting day, the smooth comfort of a beloved object kept too long, maybe a rag doll as a carved toy, a spoon, a shell from somewhere left behind. Small possessions matter intensely when there are few of them. A child may cherish one marble or ribbon with the seriousness of a king guarding treasure. Meals are important stages in the child's day, not only for hunger, but for order. The smell of bread, porridge, onions, beans, pork, or stew gathers the household into one place. However briefly, children learn table manners, or frontier versions of them, while also learning scarcity. Take only what you will eat, do not spill. Wait your turn, leave some for others. Eat now because work follows. These lessons are social and economic at once. A child slowly understands that food is not automatic. Someone worked for every bite. And then there is weather, which shapes childhood as completely as it shapes crops. Summer means heat, insects, scratched arms, and the freedom of staying outdoors until dusk if chores permit. Autumn brings sharper air, harvest work, and piles of things to carry, sort, or store. Winter compresses the household inward, boots by the door, mittens drying, breath visible in cold rooms, children tracking in snow and receiving stern looks for it. Spring unleashes mud with astonishing energy, A child can lose half a boot to it and consider the event memorable for all the wrong reasons. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how children themselves understood this labour. Some historians argue that work gave rural children competence, belonging, and earlier independence than later urban childhoods allowed. Others emphasise fatigue, curtailed schooling, physical risk, and the emotional burden of being needed too soon. Both views carry truth. A child can feel proud and overworked on the same day. Human experience rarely lines up in neat moral rows. Illness and loss also enter childhood more directly here than many modern listeners might expect. A sibling's fever changes the mood of the entire house. A fall from a horse or wagon is not merely dramatic. It can alter work patterns for weeks. A child may be sent to fetch water, ride for help, or sit very still while adults whisper nearby. These moments press seriousness into young faces. Frontier children often learned early that life could turn sharply from ordinary to alarming in a single afternoon. Still, ordinary joys persist with stubborn energy. The smell of warm milk foaming into a tin cup, the thrill of finding bird eggs, though adults may forbid touching them, snowlight flooding the room, a dog that understands games better than instructions, the pleasure of new boots, or even newer hand-me-downs, wild berries staining fingers, listening to a story while mending or shelling peas, watching shadows lengthen across the yard while the supper smell grows stronger. Childhood does not disappear. It simply grows around need. Older children carry heavier burdens. Boys may handle teams, ploughs, fencing, woodcutting, or longer errands once strength allows. Girls may take over more cooking, washing, sewing, dairy work, younger siblings, and household management. These divisions are real in many places, though necessity often blurs them. If someone is absent, sick, or overwhelmed, whoever can do the task may do it. Frontier families cannot always afford strict ideology when the bread is burning or the calf is loose. Adolescence arrives almost without introduction. One season you are trusted with the smaller pail, the next with the horse. One year you are chasing hens for amusement, the next you are expected to help kill, clean, salt, plant, mend, count, watch, and endure. The body lengthens, the voice shifts, and the family quietly raises its expectations. A young person may feel older than the calendar claims simply because the household has started treating them like another pair of real hands. One very human little detail from frontier accounts is the hunger children often had for visiting. A trip to a neighbour's place, a church social, a school day, a quilting, a barn raising, any event that meant other faces and a slight break from routine could glow in memory for years. New company meant stories, sweets if fortune smiled, games, possible friendships, and the chance to compare lives. Isolation made society feel electric. Night brings another educational institution altogether. The home darkens. Lamps or candles throw small circles of light. Adults mend, read, talk quietly, or simply sit with the fatigue that has earned its place. Children listen more than adults realize. They absorb family history, scraps of politics, worries about weather, remarks about neighbours, and practical knowledge disguised as casual talk. A child lying on bedding in the corner may appear asleep while collecting an entire world view through half-closed eyes. What life was really like for children in these households was not a simple tale of innocent freedom under open skies, nor a grim march with no delight in it. It was a tighter braid, labour and play, wonder and caution, responsibility and mischief. Learning from books when books existed, and from weather, animals, tools, and adults when they did not. A child on the frontier grew fast because the world kept asking useful questions and expected useful answers. By the time the room finally quiets, the children of the homestead have been shaped by a full day of being needed, corrected, trusted, warned, amused, fed, and set to work again. Their dreams, if dreams come gently, are likely made from the same materials. Fields, fires, horses, tall grass, bread smell, wind, a teacher's voice, perhaps, the call to bring water, the thrill of running where the sky seems to have no end. And in the morning they will wake not as decorations in the family story, but as part of the machinery that keeps it going. The seasons do not arrive as scenery on a homestead. They arrive as instructions. Each one changes what must be done, what can be eaten, how the house feels, how the animals behave, how the body moves, and what the family fears most. On open land, time is not measured only by dates or holidays. It is measured by mud depth, frostbite, grass height, the smell before rain, and the first morning when the wash-water seems almost offended to be liquid. Spring rarely enters politely. It lurches in. The ground softens, swells, and begins clinging to every boot with theatrical neediness. Paths disappear under muck. Wagon wheels sink deeper than expected. A person can spend half a day simply moving badly from one wet place to another. The air smells rich and raw, full of thawing earth, rotted stems, cold water, and the sharp mineral scent of places that have spent months locked tight and are now opening reluctantly. You feel it underfoot first, then in the nose, then in the mood of the whole household. Spring promises life, but it also creates work at an alarming rate. Fences have sagged. Roofs have confessed their winter weaknesses. Tools need mending. Animals need attention. The garden must be prepared. Fields must be broken or replanted. Water runs where it pleases, and what looked solid last week becomes a shallow trap this week. Clothing never seems quite dry. Blankets hold the smell of dampness. The doorway collects mud as if it were being paid to do so. And still, spring carries hope. The first green shoots appear and the eye catches them instantly. A row in the garden begins to mean something. Trees, where there are trees, show their new leaves with shameless confidence. Birds return noisily, like neighbours with stories. The light changes too. It grows softer in the morning, broader in the evening. For a few minutes at a time, standing in the yard with a cold breeze against your cheek, you can believe the whole place is beginning again with you. Then a late frost ruins someone's confidence. That is the other lesson of spring. It can betray with a lovely face. A warm spell invites early planting, only for a hard, cold night to flatten your optimism by dawn. Historians who study agricultural settlement often note how damaging these shoulder season surprises could be, especially for new farmers still learning local patterns. Knowledge from one region did not always travel well to another. People planted by memory and paid for it with uncertainty. Summer changes the terms completely. Heat settles over the claim with a weight that seems to press even the sound out of the afternoon. Work begins earlier because the middle of the day becomes a kind of glowing punishment. The sun sharpens every smell. Dust, sweat, horse leather, cut grass, hot boards, warm milk. The inside of the house traps cooking heat until the room feels like an argument between smoke and air. Shirts cling, hair dampens at the neck, eyes narrow against the light. Water grows more serious in summer. Again, a creek that looked cheerful in spring may begin shrinking into a slower, sadder version of itself. Buckets come back lighter than you would like. Animals stand near the source longer. Gardens demand more than the sky is offering. The earth on some claims cracks at the surface, opening narrow lines that look almost decorative until you remember what they mean. You begin listening for thunder with more attention than you listen to most people. Storms, when they come, make their own entrance. First a stillness, then a different smell in the wind, cool and metallic. Then the sky changes colour at the edges, on the plains. A storm can look like a whole wall deciding to move. You gather what you can, bring things in, tie things down, check the animals, shut the door, then wait with one ear on the roof and one on the children. Rain hammers, wind pushes, thunder rolls across open country so widely that it feels less like a noise and more like a condition of the world. A quirky frontier truth is how many people learn to read weather from tiny signs with almost superstitious intensity. The ring around the moon, the way swallows flew, the smell in the grass, the behaviour of cattle, the feel of pressure in the head before a storm. Some of this had practical value. Some of it belonged more to inherited belief than reliable science. On a homestead, though, if a neighbour claimed his left knee predicted rain better than the sky did, You might laugh and still pay attention. Summer also brings insects in numbers that can make a person briefly question civilization itself. Flies worry animals and people alike. Mosquitoes rise from damp ground or still water and sing their mean little songs at dusk. Gnats collect wherever patience is already running low. The sound of summer is not only birds and breeze, it is buzzing, whining, clicking, rasping life all around you. Screened windows are rare luxuries in many first homes, so you swat, cover, endure, and try not to let irritation become the leading family value. Fields and gardens demand nearly constant judgment in these months. Is the corn doing well enough? Do the beans need replanting? Are weeds stealing too much strength? Has the soil crusted too hard after heat? Is there enough hay put by? Could another rain come soon, or must something be cut now? This is where summer tests not only muscle, but timing. A few days can matter enormously. Delay can cost yield. Haste can cost it too. Farming often feels like making important decisions with imperfect information while tired, which, come to think of it, describes quite a lot of life. Autumn moves in with more dignity. The heat eases. The air gains a cleaner edge. Mornings carry that unmistakable smell of dry grass, smoke, apples if you're fortunate enough to have them, and earth cooling after long months of sun. Clothing feels better on the skin. The body works with a little more willingness. Yet autumn is not restful. It is crowded. Harvest, storage, butchering, preserving, woodcutting, repair, preparation, and a bit more preparation for good measure. This season has urgency hidden inside beauty. Fields may look golden and calm, but every day asks a practical question. Can this be brought in before weather turns? Can vegetables be stored safely? Is there enough hay, enough grain, enough fuel, enough cloth mended before real cold arrives? Enough chinking in the wall, enough cover for animals, enough patience in the household for one more long task before dark. The smell of autumn is lovely partly because it is mixed with accomplishment. Things are being gathered, stacked, salted, dried, and saved. Mainstream history often emphasizes harvest as a communal and labor-intensive high point of rural life, and that holds true for many homesteaders too. Families strained to gather crops quickly, sometimes with help from neighbors, because a missed window could erase months of effort. Corn shocks in fields, root cellars filling, pumpkins lined up, smoked meat hanging, grain bagged and protected, wood piles growing beside the house. These sites did not just look prosperous. They felt like insulation against fear. And then winter enters. It does not always announce itself with a grand first storm. Sometimes it begins in smaller warnings, a sharper bite in the wind, ice along the bucket rim before dawn, breath visible indoors, the boards or walls of the shelter feeling colder to the touch, the earth stiffening underfoot. A morning when you hesitate before stepping out because the air itself seems to have developed opinions about your survival. Winter on a homestead can feel animate. It presses at cracks, prowls around the doorframe, creeps through poor boots, stiffens laundry, hardens mud, and makes every ordinary task slower and more deliberate. Water must still be fetched, but now the handle burns cold into the hand. Animals must still be fed, but now the path is iced or drifted over. Firewood must still be carried, split, stacked, and guarded from waste. The body learns to conserve motion. Fingers thicken under cloth, ears ache, cheeks sting, the inside of your nose feels painfully alive. The house changes character in winter. Even a rough shelter becomes a defended space in a more dramatic way than during warmer months. Fire is everything. The smell of smoke deepens in fabric, bedding, and hair. Damp mittens steam by the hearth. Iron stoves or rough fireplaces become the centre around which meals, mending, thawing, and conversation all gather. The farther you sit from the heat, the more the cold reminds you that the walls are only an argument, not a guarantee. A scholarly uncertainty remains around how families in different regions remembered winter hardship, because later recollections often mixed pride with exaggeration and selective forgetting. Some settlers described storms and cold with near-epic grandeur. Others mention them more matter-of-factly, perhaps because routine suffering becomes difficult to narrate freshly. Historians still weigh diaries, weather records, and memoirs against one another to judge just how exceptional certain winters truly were for specific communities. Memory likes drama, but frostbite does not need embellishment. Snow can transform the landscape into something beautiful enough to be almost offensive. The open land falls quiet, fences soften into white lines, roofs turn smooth. Morning light flashes so brightly off the drifts that your eyes water. The air smells clean in a severe way, like iron, smoke, and distance. For one suspended moment, the world appears pure. Then you remember the path to the animals needs opening, the wood pile is shrinking, and somebody tracks slush across the floor, you just try to keep dry. Blizzards are their own category of trial. Wind drives snow sideways. The house groans and sifts cold from every weakness. Outside vanishes into white movement. Landmarks disappear. A person can lose direction alarmingly close to home. Families bank fires, crowd together, listen hard, and wait. The sound is unforgettable. A long rushing pressure around the walls, punctuated by loose boards, shifting roof materials, or the anxious noise of animals. Storm outside, tight breath inside. And yet winter also concentrates domestic life in ways no other season can. More sewing, more tool repair, more reading if books exist, more stories told in low light, more time watching children's faces by fire glow, more awareness of every object that keeps the room functioning. A dry log, a sound bucket, a full sack, a patched quilt, a pair of gloves not yet lost to fate. The household becomes smaller, closer, and in some ways more intimate because the weather has narrowed the world to what is under your roof and within your care. The seasons test mood as much as materials. Spring can make people restless and rash. Summer can make them irritable and worn. Autumn can make them anxious beneath their competence. Winter can make them quiet in ways that are either peaceful or heavy. On a homestead, emotion often follows weather more closely than people admit. A run of clear, mild days can improve an entire household's manners. 1 week of mud or hard cold can thin patience to paper. Children feel it. Adults feel it. Animals certainly feel it. Horses blow steam and stamp. Cows bawl differently when weather turns. Chickens sulk. Dogs become weather prophets by posture alone. Even the sounds of work shift through the year. The wet suck of spring mud. The dry rasp of summer grass. The steady thump of autumn chopping. The brittle crunch of winter ground. A homesteader learns the calendar through the ears. What life was really like under these changing skies was not simply hardship piled on hardship. It was adaptation repeated until it became instinct. You stored, mended, planted, cut, carried, waited, hurried, watched, and guessed as the year turned. One season asked for courage in exposure. Another asked for endurance in confinement. Another demanded speed. Another patience. Survival came not from conquering nature in one grand triumph, but from negotiating with it month after month. By night, in whichever season has laid its hand over the land, the household settles into the sounds and smells of that particular stretch of the year. Damp boots by the door in spring. Warm dust on the sill in summer. Dry husks and stored produce in autumn. Smoke heavy in wool during winter. The bed feels different. The air feels different. Even silence has seasonal texture. And as you lie there listening to wind, rain, insects, thaw drip, or the hush of snow outside, you understand something the land has been teaching all along. The seasons do not merely surround the homestead. They shape the people inside it. A homestead can be crowded with need and still feel terribly empty. That is one of the quieter shocks of frontier life. You may spend all day surrounded by voices, animals, chores, smoke, tools, and motion, yet feel by evening that the world has narrowed to a very small circle of human contact. The land is wide, the sky is wider, and other people are often farther away than your heart prefers. Loneliness does not always arrive in silence. Sometimes it arrives while the kettle is boiling and children are speaking at once. Distance changes the meaning of company. A neighbour is not simply a pleasant extra. A neighbour may be help with a birth, a fever, a broken axle, a runaway team, a barn raising, a missing child, a borrowed cup of yeast, a shared newspaper, a prayer spoken aloud, or the one person within riding distance who can tell you whether others are surviving the same ugly weather. On a frontier claim, society is practical long before it becomes decorative. That is why first visits matter so much. The sound of wheels or hoofbeats approaching can travel into a household like news from another world. Dogs bark, someone glances out, a child runs to the door. Suddenly the day changes shape. A caller may arrive dusty, wind-blown, apologetic, cheerful, solemn, or merely curious. It almost does not matter which. Human presence itself carries relief. The smell of horses, leather, outdoor air, and road dust enters with them, followed by speech that does not belong entirely to your own household. The room feels larger at once. There is usually coffee if coffee can be managed. If not coffee, then something warm or some form of welcome assembled from what the pantry can spare. Hospitality on the frontier can be astonishingly generous given how little some families possess. A plate appears, a chair is cleared, children are straightened or gently threatened into better manners. Someone asks about roads, weather, sickness, prices, crops, or the latest rumour from town. Information travels mouth to mouth as dependably as anything else out here, in places where newspapers arrive late or not at all. A visitor may carry a whole week's excitement in one hat. The talk itself becomes nourishment. Who has planted already? Whose cow calved? Whether the creek is still running well? Which family might need help? Whether a store has received new goods? Whether a preacher is expected Sunday? Whether there is illness near the settlement? Whether the land agent is honest? Which is a question likely to inspire dark humour. Frontier gossip can sound small to outsiders, but small facts shape survival. Even the apparently trivial matters. A new path that stays drier after rain. A family willing to trade eggs for flour. A child sick with something catching. A neighbour with a sound sore. Such details sit very close to the bone of daily life. Mainstream historians have long pointed out that mutual aid was central to many frontier communities, especially in periods of initial settlement when cash was scarce and formal institutions were weak or absent. Labour exchanges, shared tools, cooperative building, food lending, and informal nursing networks often mattered as much as private household effort. The myth of total self-reliance never quite survives contact with real homestead diaries. People depended on each other, sometimes eagerly, sometimes resentfully, but quite often unmistakably. Shared labour has its own social feeling, a barn raising, harvest gathering, quilting bee, wood-cutting day, or house raising brings bodies together around a task too large or too urgent for one family alone. The sounds are vigorous and layered, hammering, calling, horses snorting, children underfoot, women passing food, carrying water, minding babies, stitching, laughing, men lifting, measuring, bracing, swearing mildly at stubborn wood. Work becomes less lonely when it's audible in company. Even exhaustion feels lighter when it has witnesses. Food at such gatherings can taste almost festive simply because it is eaten among others. Pies if there is enough fruit or dried stores, beans, bread, smoked meat, pickles, preserves, boiled coffee strong enough to wake a fence post. The smell of fresh bread or roasting meat drifting across a workyard can give tired muscles fresh instructions. A meal shared in common does more than fill the belly. It confirms that the settlement exists. The individual hardships have not dissolved the larger human circle. And yet companionship is not always easy. Neighbours can save you and still get on your nerves. That too is part of the truth. Scarcity makes people observant in uncomfortable ways. Who borrowed and did not return. Who helped less than expected. Whose animals drifted into whose field. Who boasts too much. Who keeps cleaner children. Who lets troubles spill loudly into the lane. Gossip can strengthen social bonds, but it can also scratch them raw. In isolated places, personalities loom larger because there are fewer alternatives. A mildly irritating person in town can be ignored. A mildly irritating person 3 miles away, with the only reliable well on that side of the road, becomes a more complex emotional experience. Still, Most people learn the value of tolerating a fair amount. You may not approve of a neighbour's housekeeping, politics, courtship habits, theology, or taste in fence construction. Yet when sickness comes or storm damage tears a roof open, opinions soften quickly under necessity. Frontier etiquette often rests on a simple principle: save judgment for another day if today requires cooperation. Religious gatherings often become social lifelines as much as spiritual ones. A church service held in a cabin, schoolhouse, or under open sky may gather families who otherwise see one another only in passing. Hymns rise through rough voices and uneven harmonies, carrying warmth through plain rooms. The smell is familiar: wool coats, dust, damp boots, lamp smoke, soap, and babies. A sermon offers structure to the week, but the meeting before and after may matter just as much. News is exchanged, marriages considered, illnesses noted, grief noticed, friendships renewed. A person can feel stitched back into community simply by hearing others sing the same tune. One quirky detail of frontier social life is how precious a newspaper could become once it reached a remote settlement. Even an old paper might be read aloud, passed around, reread, discussed, and argued over until the creases went soft. News from cities, politics, advertisements, market reports, and even absurd little notices could entertain for evenings. A single printed page connected the homestead to a larger world of railroads, speeches, scandals, inventions, and distant wars. Later it might wrap parcels, line a shelf, or patch a drafty spot. But for a little while it became ceremony. Loneliness tends to visit most sharply after company leaves. Wheels roll away, hoofbeats fade, the yard stills, the room holds their absence, cups need washing. A chair sits empty where someone laughed an hour ago. Outside, the wind moves through grass or around the house as if nothing happened. That can be the hardest moment. You realise how hungry you were for ordinary talk, for a face not already known in every expression. For another person to confirm that your household is not drifting at the edge of the world unseen. The emotional weather of isolation varies from person to person. Some relish the quiet more than others. Some find deep peace in open space, while others feel the weight of distance like a hand on the chest. Women often described loneliness particularly sharply in letters and recollections, especially when daily work kept them tied closely to home, while men might range farther for trade, hunting, or field tasks. Children, too, could ache for companionship beyond siblings. A day may pass in work without complaint. Then evening falls and homesickness rises with the lamp smoke. Historians still argue about how socially isolated frontier households truly were across different regions and decades, because experience varied tremendously. Some settlements built strong local networks quickly, others remained scattered, suspicious, or too transient for stable bonds. Diaries and memoirs reflect both extremes. One person recalls endless visiting, another, only miles away in similar country, writes as if abandoned on an island of grass. Much depended on roads, weather, ethnicity, class, religion, and the luck of who settled nearby. Women's visits often carried layers of work and relief at once. One might come to help with a birth, to sit with the sick, to borrow yeast, to return a pan, to exchange seeds, or simply because the afternoon had grown too large and needed another voice in it. While hands shell peas, quilt, churn, mend, or mine children, conversation moves through births, deaths, prices, recipes, marriages, aches, sermons, and practical wisdom about everything from soap making to surviving grasshoppers. The talk can be tender, sharp, funny, and astonishingly efficient. Emotional support often travels disguised as ordinary conversation. Men, too, form their own rough networks through work, trade, mutual repairs, hunting trips, meetings in town, and the shared judgment of weather and crops. These relationships may sound more reserved in recollection, yet they matter deeply. A man who can help raise a wall, pull a wagon from mud, lend a chain, identify a disease in the stock, or quietly sit through a cup of coffee while both of you complain about prices is no small blessing. Frontier friendship is not always verbal. Sometimes it arrives carrying a shovel. Children seize social chances with an intensity adults sometimes forget. Another child at the door can transform a dull day instantly. Games break out in the yard. Running, shrieking, improvised teams, secret clubs, quarrels solved with tears and 5 minutes later forgotten. The sound of several children playing together has a different texture than siblings alone. It is looser, more electric, full of negotiation and invention. Parents may tolerate a surprising amount of chaos in exchange for the happiness such visits bring. Then there are the small comforts that soften isolation without entirely curing it. Coffee sipped slowly after chores, a letter read and reread until the paper grows limp, a lamp lit against early dark, a favourite hymn hummed while sweeping, a bit of sugar saved for a special day, a clean apron, fresh bread, a pipe by the doorway at dusk, a fiddle tune on a Saturday night. These things do not remove loneliness, but they cushion it. They tell the senses that life still contains pleasure. Not only duty, touch matters here too. A handshake at the gate, a neighbour's arm around a grieving shoulder, hands passing dishes at a social supper, quilting frames worked side by side, children leaning against adults during a long sermon. Community is not only spoken, it is felt in bodily nearness after too much separation. Even the crush of a crowded room can be comforting when daily life usually offers only open sky and the same few walls. One especially important kind of frontier gathering is the event born from misfortune. A death, a fire, a bad injury, a difficult birth, a crop failure that has gone from rumour to fact. Then neighbours arrive not for leisure, but because the settlement understands that any one family may need such help next season. Women cook, wash, watch children, sit up with the sick, prepare bodies for burial. Men dig, build, haul, repair, stand watch, and make themselves useful without fuss if they have sense. Grief in these communities is rarely private for long. Hardship draws witnesses. The tone is not always solemn. Humour survives almost everywhere people gather. Jokes about weather, mules, politics, stingy merchants, pious hypocrites, and failed recipes pass between tired mouths because laughter is a form of fuel. Gentle teasing can warm a room as surely as coffee. Someone always tells a story that grows better in the telling. Someone else denies its accuracy and adds details anyway. In lonely country, shared amusement is not trivial. It is a way of proving that hardship has not swallowed personality whole. Town visits, when they happen, offer another kind of company. Even a small settlement can feel thrilling after days or weeks on the claim. Store shelves, strangers, wagons, voices overlapping, bells, hammers, doors, boots, livestock noise, the smell of feed, tobacco, flour, leather, and mud all blending into a kind of rough music. A person may spend money too freely simply because the heart is intoxicated by contact. Town is not only commerce, it is stimulation. It reminds you that the world contains more than your own routines and worries. But then you return home, and the road stretches quiet again. That return has its own ache. The homestead waits. Chores resume. Distance settles back into place. Yet you bring something home with you. News. Yes. Supplies perhaps. But also the memory of being among others. The refreshed sense that your life connects to a wider human pattern. Those small renewals matter more than the ledger shows. What life was really like in this social landscape was a constant balancing of independence and dependence. The homestead trained people to manage alone, yet it also revealed how deeply alone could wound. Neighbours might irritate, judge, borrow, pry, or talk too much, but they could also rescue, comfort, teach, nurse, build, and bear witness. Loneliness and fellowship were not opposites on the frontier. They lived side by side, each making the other more intense. As evening settles and the house grows quieter, you may sit with a cup warming your hands while the last light fades beyond the yard. Perhaps there has been a visitor today. Perhaps not. Perhaps only the memory of voices lingers. The room smells of a coffee, smoke, and supper. A child murmurs in sleep. Wind brushes the wall softly. Somewhere beyond sight, another household banks its fire and settles in under the same broad dark, That thought can be a comfort all by itself. You are not as alone as the land sometimes makes you feel. By the time a homestead begins to look almost settled, money has usually become the quiet shadow in every room. It sits beside the flour barrel, near the tool chest, under the bedding, and somewhere behind nearly every conversation about weather, animals, crops, and plans. You may own land in theory, or hold a claim, or improve a patch that feels like yours in sweat if not yet in comfort. But cash remains scarce and stubbornly necessary. The frontier is full of people who look rich in sky and poor in coin. That difference matters more than pride likes to admit. A family starting from nothing does not escape the marketplace just because the nearest town is far away. Quite the opposite. Distance can make dependence sharper. You need nails, tools, seed, cloth, salt, lamp oil, hardware, perhaps a plough part, perhaps medicine, perhaps a wagon repair that no amount of wishing can improvise. Even if the land yields something useful, that yield often comes later than the bill. Need arrives first. Payment asks rude questions afterward. Debt enters quietly. At first it may look manageable. A little credit at the store, a promise to settle after harvest, a borrowed team for a few days, seed advanced on trust, lumber taken now because shelter cannot wait, a fee delayed, a small note signed because the roof, the plough, the horse, the well, the fence, the family. Everything seems to depend on this one reasonable expense, and sometimes it truly is reasonable. The problem is that reasonable expenses can line up like eager cousins until the household ledger begins to resemble a confession. You feel debt in the body before you discuss it plainly. It tightens the voice. It changes how a person opens a letter. It sharpens every glance toward the sky. It turns a sick calf into a financial event and a broken tool into a cold little wave in the stomach. If a ploughshare cracks, the sound of that failure does not end in the field. It echoes straight into the pantry. If a horse goes lame, the limp reaches the supper table before dusk. Mainstream historians have long shown that many frontier households operated within thin margins, relying on seasonal income, informal credit, bartering, and delayed payment rather than steady cash flow. The image of the self-sufficient pioneer standing completely outside commercial systems simply does not hold up well. Even families producing much of what they consumed still needed markets, merchants, mills, transport, and credit. Homestead was never as isolated from money as legend later preferred, and the money problem becomes cruelest when nature or chance decides to collaborate against you. One bad crop can redraw the year, too much rain at the wrong time, not enough rain at the worst time. Hail that arrives with the destructive confidence of something sent personally. Insects stripping the fields, livestock disease, a child's illness that consumes time and supplies, a wagon axle snapping days from town, a stove breaking in cold weather, a fire in the grass, a late frost after hopeful planting. Every frontier family knows that failure does not always come through laziness or poor judgment. Sometimes failure arrives with weather and leaves no room for argument. Still, people often blame themselves first. That is part of the sadness. You review every decision in your mind as though one better choice might have held back the storm. Should the corn have gone in earlier? Should the hay have been cut 2 days sooner? Should the cow have been sold while still healthy? Should the extra nails have been purchased later? Should the wheat have been tried on that patch at all? Frontier life encourages second-guessing because outcomes are so visible and consequences so immediate. When the field looks poor, the doubt looks poor with it. A quirky but telling truth from many settlement accounts is how often families tried to hide the worst of their hardship from neighbours, at least at first. Pride arranged itself carefully, a patched dress brushed clean, a nearly empty pantry described as adequate, a sick animal spoken of as recovering. People who depended on community still wanted to appear worthy within it. There is something painfully human in sweeping the floor before someone comes to help you, because the roof is failing. Eventually, though, failure becomes too large to tidy. Perhaps the crop is plainly ruined. Perhaps the well has disappointed beyond patience. Perhaps illness has taken a worker from the household for weeks. Perhaps the debt at the store has hardened from understanding into pressure. The merchant asks with more firmness. The note comes due. The creditor writes or appears. The conversation changes tone. You can almost feel it in the room. Fewer pleasantries, more throat clearing, more words like settle, account, obligation, security, extension. Some families scrape through by selling something they had hoped to keep. A pig, a calf, a wagon part, a quilt, a watch, a spare tool. The loss is material, but it is also emotional because each object once represented a margin of safety. To sell it means the margin is narrowed further. To keep it may mean another bill remains unpaid. Poverty makes philosophers of everyone, though not always cheerful ones. Barter offers help, but not magic. Eggs for flour, butter for cloth, labour for use of a team, sowing for goods, a day helping with harvest in exchange for milling, soap for seed. Frontier households developed astonishing skill in converting effort into survival through informal exchange. Yet barter cannot always solve the hardest problems. A blacksmith may admire your chickens and still prefer cash, taxes, fees, legal filings, and some supplies possess the deeply annoying habit of wanting money rather than charm. Historians still argue about how many apparently successful homesteads were, in practice, only a season or two away from collapse. Local booster accounts and later family stories often celebrated perseverance and eventual prosperity. But private letters and county records can reveal a shakier reality. Many settlers endured repeated near failures, moved on, rented out claims, sold under pressure, or survived only by combining farming with wage labour, craft work, or help from relatives. Success on the frontier was often less a grand triumph than a prolonged avoidance of disaster. That uncertainty saturates daily life. A person mending a harness may also be calculating debt. A woman measuring flour may be imagining the next door visit with dread. A child sent to gather eggs may hear the strain in adult voices without understanding figures at all. Money anxiety rarely stays in one corner. It leaks into mood, appetite, patience, and sleep. You see this especially when the harvest comes in smaller than hoped. The field that promised relief now offers arithmetic. How much to keep for seed? How much for food? How much to sell? How much will transport swallow before anything reaches market? Are prices rising or falling? Is it wiser to sell now or wait and risk spoilage, weather, or a worse market later? Even abundance can become stressful when it must be divided under pressure. A stack of grain is not peace until it survives the counting. Transport itself can be a hidden thief. A crop is one thing in the field and another on the road. Distance to market means time, labour, wagon wear, animal strain, possible damage, and the uncertainty of what price will greet you at the far end. A man may leave home with what looks like value and return with disappointingly little after deductions, delays, and expenses. This is one reason many homesteaders kept one foot in other forms of work when possible. Hauling, seasonal labour, hunting, cutting timber, washing, sewing, boarding, teaching, blacksmithing, whatever skill could bring in extra means. The farm alone did not always behave like a faithful provider. One odd little frontier habit reveals just how close households lived to the edge. People often saved envelopes, string, wrapping paper, old sacks, and account scraps with almost ceremonial seriousness, not simply because they were thrifty, though they were, but because any material might become useful in some next round of making do. Scarcity teaches the eye to see future use in almost everything. Waste begins to look insulting. Failure can also be social. That is harder to bear. A struggling family may fear not only hunger or debt, but reputation. Will neighbours think them idle, foolish, weak, unlucky in a way that makes others uneasy? In settlements where cooperation matters, reputation has practical value. People are more eager to lend, help, or trust those they view as capable and honourable. So households work fiercely to appear steady. The yard is kept as neat as circumstances allow. The children washed for Sunday if possible. The fence repaired visibly. Order becomes a statement. We are still managing. We are still here. But sometimes they are not still here for long. Starting again was part of frontier reality, though later memory often disguised it. A family might leave one claim and try another valley, another territory, another arrangement closer to town, nearer timber, farther from bad water, safer from debt, or simply more forgiving than the place that had worn them down. The departure could be practical, humiliating, relieving, or all three together. Packing up a half-built life feels different from first arrival. Then, hope led. Now, experience does experience. And experience has a sterner face. The senses mark that difference. The smell of old boards taken down and loaded again. Dust rising from familiar objects that once seemed permanent. Harness leather stiff from long use. A room echoing after bedding and boxes are removed. The yard looking strangely naked without tools leaning where they had come to belong. Even the silence is changed. It no longer feels like possibility. It feels like an ending with work still attached. Yet starting again does happen, more often than myth would comfortably allow. A family learns from failure, though not always enough to prevent a new one. Better land reading, better timing, more caution with credit, a greater respect for water sources, less romance about distance, more appreciation for nearby markets and decent roads. The second beginning may be wiser, poorer, and less dramatic. It may also stand a better chance precisely because innocence has already been spent. There is emotional exhaustion in this cycle that records do not always capture. Repeated effort without secure reward can flatten a spirit. You rise, work, hope, save, plan, improvise, and then watch a season unravel because of circumstances beyond control. The frontier asked for resilience with extraordinary confidence, as though human beings generated it endlessly like wind over the prairie. In truth, resilience had to be fed by community, by faith, by small successes, by rest when it could be stolen, by stubbornness, perhaps most of all. Sometimes the household finds relief through a lucky turn. Good prices one season, a healthy crop, a strong calf crop, a neighbour's fair deal, a child old enough now to contribute more, a better well, a merchant willing to extend credit one more time without malice in his face. Fortune need not be dramatic to matter. On the frontier, modest good luck could feel downright luxurious. Sometimes relief never really arrives. Instead there is endurance. That distinction matters. Many homesteaders did not rise from nothing into picturesque abundance. They remained close to need for years, improving slowly, slipping back, advancing again, making a life from irregular gains and repeated compromise. The polished story of inevitable progress flattens too much. What life was really like included false starts, humiliations, unpaid bills, lost animals, broken implements, cracked hopes, and the humiliating requirement to ask for help one more time. And yet asking for help was often a sign not of failure, but of staying in the fight. A borrowed team, a shared harvest crew, seed from a neighbour, meals brought during sickness, credit extended because someone believed in your chances a little longer than the numbers did. These things kept households alive. Pride may have winced, but survival has always been more practical than pride. At night, after figures have been discussed in low voices and the rumours quieted, money still lingers in the dark like weather waiting beyond the wall. You think of the store account, the cost of replacing that tool, the uncertain market, the poor field, the cow that coughed today, the shoes the child will soon need, the flour barrel dropping lower than you like. The bed holds you, but not all of you rests. Part of the mind remains up, pacing the floorboards of tomorrow, outside. The land is calm enough to seem innocent. Stars over the claim. Grass or stubble moving faintly in the night air. A barn or shed standing where labour placed it. From a distance, it could all look like progress. From inside the house, progress can be fragile. It can crack like a handle, sicken like a horse, wash away like topsoil, or vanish into a ledger. Still, morning will come and the household will rise again. That is the final stubborn fact in all of this. Failure wounded, debt threatened, plans collapsed, but people kept trying. Sometimes on the same claim, sometimes on another, sometimes with more wisdom, sometimes only with fewer choices. The frontier did not merely test whether you could succeed, it tested whether you could begin again after not succeeding. In the end, The homestead changes you long before it rewards you. That may be the deepest truth of beginning with almost nothing in 1860. You arrive thinking mostly about land, shelter, food, weather, and survival. Those remain important every single day. Yet beneath them, another process is working quietly. The frontier is shaping your habits, your temper, your body, your expectations, your silences, and even your idea of what a good life looks like. You become more physical than you once were. That sounds obvious, but the change runs deep. Your hands thicken. Your back learns effort as a native language. Your feet understand distance without complaint. You read the sky without noticing that you are reading it. You judge a fence, a roofline, a team of animals, a patch of soil, a stack of fuel, or the sound of a wheel with instincts that did not exist when you first arrived. Knowledge settles into the muscles. You no longer know things only in the mind. You know them in the knees, shoulders, palms, and breath. Work itself changes meaning. In easier places, labour can feel like a separate part of life, one thing among others. On a homestead, labour is woven through everything. It determines meals, sleep, comfort, reputation, safety, and hope. The line between work and living grows thin. Sweeping the floor, chopping wood, lifting water, mending a shirt, tending a child, checking the field, patching a roof, saving bacon fat, banking a fire. All of it becomes part of one continuous effort to hold life together against weather, distance, and bad luck. That effort alters your standards. A dry floor feels luxurious. A full wood pile looks beautiful. A sound bucket becomes a reliable friend. A good harvest seems almost holy. People who have not lived close to need may never fully understand how lovely plain usefulness can become. On the frontier, beauty often arrives dressed as sufficiency. Warm bread, a tight roof, a healthy cow, a child outgrowing old boots because there has been enough food, a shelf with jars standing in order, a lamp with enough oil for one more evening. These things do not glitter, but they shine in the spirit. Mainstream historians often describe the frontier as a place that fostered independence, and there is truth in that. You do become more capable, more resourceful, more accustomed to making do with whatever is at hand. You solve problems because there is no one else immediately available to solve them for you. You improvise because tools fail, distances delay, and money vanishes. You discover strengths you did not know you possessed. But independence is only half the story. The other half is dependence. That is one of the great corrections to the old myth. Homesteaders did not survive alone in any pure heroic sense. They depended on neighbours, family, weather, markets, animals, tools, memory, luck, and one another's endurance. A person may chop alone, plough alone, or keep watch alone. But no household truly prospers by isolation alone. Community, however imperfect, remains part of the machinery of survival. The frontier makes this plain, though pride sometimes tries to blur it afterward. The home changes too, and because it changes, so do you. At first it may be little more than a rude shelter, smelling of earth, smoke, damp wool, and strain. Later it gains order, a proper shelf, more bedding, better tools, a patched curtain, swept corners, a place for everything, even if that place is humble. The transformation may be slow, but it trains the eye to notice progress in inches rather than in grand speeches. This is how homestead life reshapes the mind. It teaches you to value accumulation without extravagance, improvement without show, comfort without softness. Children absorb this world in their bones. They grow up with fewer illusions about where food, warmth, and clothing come from. They learn that bread is labour made visible. They learn that weather deserves respect. They learn that adults worry quietly when money thins and that small acts can matter enormously. Some will carry these lessons with pride. Some will spend adulthood trying to escape them. Either way, the homestead leaves fingerprints on the next generation. Women carry their own transformations, many of them uncelebrated in public language but unmistakable in daily fact. Endurance sharpens, judgment deepens, the eye for scarcity grows keen, care becomes practical and fierce. The ability to balance emotion, household order, Food, clothing, illness, and plain human survival under pressure becomes almost astonishing. Men change too, often learning humility from weather, from debt, from failed plans, from tired horses, from the simple truth that the land cannot be argued into kindness. Scholars still debate what the frontier most powerfully produced in people. Some emphasize resilience and inventiveness. Others point to exhaustion, loss, hard gender expectations, environmental overreach, and the emotional costs of insecurity. Both views are necessary. The homestead could strengthen a person and wear one down at the same time. It could build self-respect while stripping away ease. It could create attachment to land while teaching that land is never fully yours in the sentimental sense. You may fence it, plough it, sleep beside it, bury loved ones in it, and still it remains larger than your plans. A quirky detail hidden inside many family recollections is how often people remembered not the grandest events, but the smallest satisfactions. The smell of coffee after a cold morning, clean sheets after weeks of dust, a ripe melon, the first fire in a finished stove, shoes that fit, a room finely papered, a gate that swung properly, a field turning green exactly when hope had begun to thin. These little victories are not accidental in memory. They are the proof that life was being built, not merely suffered. By now your understanding of success has likely changed. At first, success may have meant owning land, raising a house, harvesting a crop, or finally standing secure. Later, success becomes subtler. No one is gravely ill. The roof held through the storm. The flour lasted. The team came home sound. The children are asleep and warm. The debt did not grow worse this month. The garden gave enough to fill the pot and maybe the cellar too. Security on the frontier rarely arrives as a trumpet blast. It arrives in quiet evenings when nothing has gone wrong that day. There is also a moral change that comes from this life. Though moral may not be the perfect word, the frontier strips away some vanities and hardens some others. It can make people more generous because they understand need firsthand. It can make them more suspicious because they have seen how fragile their own margin is. It can deepen gratitude or sharpen bitterness, sometimes both in the same person. Character is not refined in one direction only. It is tested, pressed, and exposed. You learn the cost of ordinary things. You learn the weight of days. You learn that comfort is built. You learn that courage often looks like routine. That may be the final revelation. Courage on a homestead is rarely the dramatic kind. More often it is getting up sore. It is planting again after failure. It is nursing the sick without knowing the outcome. It is facing another winter with a woodpile that still feels too small. It is mending the shirt, carrying the water, baking the bread, burying the grief, and continuing anyway. History likes spectacles, but real endurance usually wears work clothes and says very little. And when people look back later and speak of the frontier as if it made them, they are not entirely wrong. It did make them, though not in the neat golden way memory sometimes prefers. It made them through repetition, loss, weather, habit, tenderness, fear, and stubborn adaptation. It changed the body, narrowed or deepened the mind, bound families together, strained them apart, gave them skills, took their ease, and forced them to decide again and again what truly mattered. In the quiet of evening, after all the noise of chores and weather and worry has eased for a little while, the homestead reveals its strangest gift. It teaches proportion. Under such a large sky, with so much dependent on labour and luck, pretences begin to look flimsy. What matters becomes plainer. Water, fire, bread, rest, decency, help when help is needed, a hand to hold, a roof that keeps out the dark, enough for one more day, enough for one more season. And perhaps that is what the frontier finally makes of you. Not a legend, not a poster figure, not an uncomplicated hero. It makes you a person who understands how much life costs and how precious it is when built by hand. The night settles now with a gentler hush. The air cools around the walls. A faint smell of ashes lingers, soft and familiar. Somewhere beyond the door, the land lies quiet under the dark, no longer demanding anything for a little while. Inside, The room has gone still. Bedding holds warmth. Wood waits by the hearth. The tools are at rest. Even worry seems to have loosened its grip, just enough for your breathing to slow. You let the day fade from its sharp edges. You let the fields, the weather, the miles, and the hard arithmetic of living drift farther away. What remains is smaller now, and kinder. The weight of a blanket, the comfort of shelter, the hush of night pressing gently at the windows and roof. You do not need to solve anything more in this moment. The buckets can wait. The wind can move over the grass without your attention. The dark can keep its distance. Here, for now. There is only the slow rise and fall of rest, the fading warmth of the hearth, and the soft certainty that even a hard-won life contains peace when the work finally pauses. So the room grows dimmer in your mind. The sounds grow softer. The land grows still, and you can simply drift, held by the quiet, while the great frontier sleeps around you.